Okay, so let's take a look at the pelvis. Now, this player is a player of a coach, a good friend of mine, Marion Mustak. Now, I saw this post on his Instagram and I asked for his permission to use this player's video to explain and show players, golfers out there, good motion of the pelvis, classic motion of the pelvis, and also pelvis motion that's supported by the 3D data motion capture systems that we have on the market currently. So firstly, we're going to look at the trigger. The trigger is the kicking in of the trail knee. That moves the pelvis laterally, swaying the pelvis towards the target, rotationally turning the pelvis towards the target, and tilting angularly, getting the pelvis moving trail hip down, lead hip up. So a little trigger move that starts the backswing, and we can see that here, that right knee going in and the pelvis moving towards the target. That then helps the player move the appropriate amount laterally with a sway of the pelvis off and away from the target. Now, this is generally done by all good players between shaft horizontal P2 and left arm horizontal P3, and the pelvis sway away from the target is no more than about ½ an inch. So it's a very small amount, and it's done really early, because between P2 shaft horizontal and P3 left arm horizontal, the recentering of the pelvis begins. So the pelvis then generally moves, the measured data supports the pelvis moving about an inch and a half towards the target between 2 and 3 to top of backswing when the hands begin the downswing, P4. When you actually see with this player, if we look at the right hip from P2 up to P4, and the back of the pelvis rotating and slightly gliding towards the target. Then there's that lateral bump before the hands start down, and we can see that clearly how much that lead hip breaks through that angled red line. So we've got a big lateral motion of the pelvis towards the target. So we've got ½ inch off, 1.5 inch towards, and then about 4 inches, 4.5 inches towards target by halfway down, just past halfway down in this player's case. And then we'll have in excess of 6 to 8 into the finish position. Okay, so a lot of pelvis motion laterally, but done early, recentered by top of backswing, slightly forwards, big shift of the pelvis towards the target by halfway down, and then a shift and a rise of the pelvis into impact. Now the pelvis actually also does slightly lower. Now halfway back, the pelvis has dropped a little bit. It doesn't drop too much downswing, but what it does do, it tends to retain that height, its height downswing, but the rise into impact is key and critical, and we see more rise. So we might see a drop of about ½ an inch at most, halfway to top of backswing. That's maintained halfway downswing. Just beyond halfway downswing, when the vertical forces are peaked and the hand speed is peaked, pelvis rise begins, and we see about ½ inch of rise up through impact, and then more rise post impact. So the lateral motion of the glide is done early, recentered, and then glides further forwards. The pelvis lowers, maintains that height, and then rises up through impact. That's our lateral motion triggered nice and early, done nice and early, and our vertical motions as well, which coincide with all of the data that we have with the force plates. Lateral forces are peaked early to create motion. Vertical forces are peaked appropriately downswing, and that can differ from different shots as well. We might see an earlier peak of vertical force with driver versus an iron versus a wedge or a short shot. But the vertical forces, we know force precedes motion, they're peaked appropriately in downswing to create vertical rise and a tilts going into impact and beyond. So this is a great drill that you can do to help you A, with the trigger, and B, to create the early lateral forces that are going to help you move your pelvis laterally, sliding it towards the target, recentering by top of the backswing, and then moving forwards ahead of center into your downswing, getting that crucial, critical lateral slide of the pelvis, what all good players do. So we're going to use the hard, large force pedal, and we're going to place it on the outside, the lateral border of the trail foot. So it's going to bank the foot in a little bit, okay? So then it's going to allow me to apply more pressure to the ball of the big toe underneath the trail foot. So I can actually use that force pedal to push against to help me with that initial trigger move that we see in that professional player. So the little bump of the hip, the little tilt of the hip, and the rotation of the pelvis. So all we're doing is that little move to get us started. Then from there, if we hold that position locked in, we can trigger the backswing and move the pelvis a little bit away, and then begin that recentering by pushing outwards. If my trail foot was standing on a clock, pushing towards 3 o'clock, and that will help you create ground reaction force that will help you recenter and glide your pelvis beyond center into your downswing.